What if I told you you could have all of the right pieces of interaction in your commander deck and still be using them entirely wrong? You can have the Swords to Plowshares, the Chaos Warps, the counter spells, the board wipes, but if you're pointing them at the wrong things or using them at the wrong time, then you still have a threat assessment problem. Threat assessment is one of the hardest skills to learn in Commander because the biggest threat at the table is not always the biggest creature. It's not always the scariest commander, and it's not always the card with the biggest reputation. Threat assessment is all about figuring out what actually matters right now. What is pushing somebody towards winning? How quickly is it becoming a problem? Does it really need to be dealt with, and do I really need to be the person to deal with it? So today, I want to break threat assessment down into a few questions that you can use during a game. And we're going to start with probably the biggest mistake that people make, which is looking at a singular card instead of the system built around other cards. So step one is recognizing the real threat. Imagine you're sitting at a table and one player has a giant 12/12 creature. Big creature. Maybe it has trample. It's terrifying. If you get hit by it, you're losing over a quarter of your life. Then say across the table, another player has a couple small creatures, a skull clamp, a free sack outlet, and a commander that rewards them whenever creatures die. Which board are you most worried about? Most players are naturally going to look at that 12/12 first, especially if you don't have any blockers. It makes sense, it's obvious, it's big, you know exactly what it does, you don't have to think about it or question it too much. However, that other board, that might actually be a bigger problem. I mean, those little creatures can get sacrificed, the skull clamp is going to start drawing them cards, their commander is going to start giving them value, those cards can turn into more creatures that in theory could sack for more cards, more value. It's an engine that gets started and may be hard to stop once it gets started. Suddenly what looked like a handful of small permanents has now turned into this engine that the entire table is struggling with. So the first thing I want you to start doing when you're assessing threats is stop looking at cards one at a time. Start looking at what the cards are doing together. Some cards are threats, but some boards with all these cards combined are a machine. One of the easiest ways to identify the real threat is to ask, what is this player's deck actually trying to accomplish? Because once you understand the plan, or their deck's identity, individual cards become a lot easier to evaluate. Look at an aristocrat's deck. Maybe they have a Blood Artist on the field. Blood Artist is a payoff. Creatures die, everybody starts losing life while they start to gain life. It's easy to look at that card and say that's the problem. However, say they also have a Viscera Seer. Now they have a free way to sack those creatures whenever they want, and maybe they already have 3 or 4 different cards that are giving them value with these on death triggers. In that situation, Viscera Seer may actually be the more important piece of the puzzle. Blood Artist is one of the payoffs, but Viscera Seer is the enabler. It's allowing these payoffs to function. However, if it's the only sack outlet on the battlefield, it's also the bottleneck. If they have multiple ways to benefit from creatures dying, but only one free singular sack outlet, removing that outlet will slow that entire engine down until they can find another one. The same idea applies elsewhere. A graveyard deck might have 20 cards in the graveyard, but only one repeatable way to bring them back. So instead of asking which permanent here is the strongest, what am I scared of in that graveyard that maybe I can exile when it comes out, what permanent can that player afford to lose the least? What can I get rid of that'll slow the entire engine down? They're not always the same card. This is why engines can be so easy to underestimate. A 10/10 creature is a 10/10 creature is a 10/10 creature. But a card draw engine can turn 3 cards into 6 cards, into 9 cards, into 12 cards. And those extra cards are giving them more mana, more spells, more resources, and probably at a lot faster rate than you're having and that everybody else is having. They're becoming a problem, whether it's immediately obvious or not. The damage is obvious, but the advantage will compound quietly. However, this does not mean that every single card draw engine or piece should immediately be destroyed. That's just replacing one bad habit, kill the biggest creature, with another, kill every single card draw engine on site. The question is still, what is this card doing in this game on this board right now? Commander has a lot of cards where people tend to see the name and immediately react. Is that a Rhystic Study, a Smothering Tithe, a Krenko Mob Boss, a commander that they know can combo out, a card that has blown them out of the water before? Knowing that a card is powerful is definitely useful information. You should use that knowledge, but a card's reputation should just make you pay attention. It shouldn't make these decisions for you. If Rhystic Study's been sitting there for 3 turns and drawing the players a pile of cards, that's one thing. But if somebody just played it, and the player across from you could potentially win or do lethal on their next turn, maybe the study's not your biggest problem right now. Same card, completely different game state. The same thing applies with game memory, right? Maybe somebody won the last game. Maybe you know that that deck has a nasty combo. Maybe that commander specifically has already run over your table, your pod before. That information definitely matters. There's a difference between remembering what a deck can do and deciding from turn one that person won last game, so I'm going to target them. At that point, you're not really assessing the current game anymore. You're playing the last one. Prior games will, and should, affect how closely you watch a player. But they shouldn't automatically decide that they're the threat right now. Use what you know, but assess the game that we're actually playing. If you feel like one particular deck has to be shut down immediately, every single game, or that one player has to be removed before the game ever gets started, it may be worth asking whether the problem is threat assessment at all. You may just be playing different decks with very different power levels. So when you look around the table, don't just ask, what is the biggest thing? Ask, what is each deck trying to do, and what is generating the advantage? As well as, which piece is actually making that engine work? Because the scariest looking permanent and the most important permanent are not always the same thing. But identifying the right threat is only the first step. Because something can absolutely be dangerous, but not need to be dealt with right now. So this brings us into the next question. How much time do you actually have to deal with it? Let's understand urgency. You've identified what the real threat actually is. This still doesn't mean that you should immediately remove it. Because a threat can be real without being urgent. And this is where a lot of good interaction gets wasted. You see something dangerous, recognize what it can do, and your first instinct is, I need to get rid of that. Maybe. But the real question is, when does this actually need to be answered? Because power tells you what deserves your attention, but urgency will tell you when you need to act. One of the simplest things that you can do is imagine what the game looks like one turn in the future. Before you make any rash decisions, see what is on the board and think, what does that look like in one turn? What is the absolute worst thing that this could theoretically do to me or to advance my opponent's board state in one turn? Let's say your opponent has a huge creature, but it doesn't have haste. You just played it. It's going to be a problem eventually, but it can't attack right now. The on-attack trigger won't trigger this turn. We at least have some time to maybe dig for a response. Maybe I can wait until somebody else responds because we have this window. However, compare that to an engine that's about to trigger on its controller's upkeep and somehow generate them 6 or 7 cards, 7 or 8 mana. That does feel a bit concerning. That card may look a lot less dramatic, but if you have a much smaller window to deal with it, some decisions need to be made. Some threats are saying, deal with me right now. While some are saying you probably need an answer before the next turn or so. And some are saying keep an eye on me, but you don't need to panic quite yet. The strongest card on the table does not always have the shortest clock. That's just how it goes. Let's say an opponent has a huge creature, like we said a second ago. No haste, no immediate trigger that's going to take over the game. You have a Swords to Plowshare in hand, you could remove it immediately. And maybe eventually you're going to need to remove it, especially if it's pointed at you. I'm looking at you, Blightsteel Colossus, I'm looking at you. But what do you gain by doing it right this second? You don't know who the creature is going to attack, and you don't know if another player maybe is going to answer it as well. If you fire off the swords immediately, then the next player presents something that actually needs an answer. Well, now we're down a piece of our interaction, we're down a piece of our resource, and we gave it all up before we actually needed to. It wasn't coming at us. That removal spell may have been correct, and maybe it was going to come at you next turn, but your timing is off. This is one of the biggest advantages of instant speed interaction. It doesn't just let you cast the spell on somebody else's turn. It lets you delay the decision and use it when it is most necessary. The longer you can safely hold onto the answer, the more information the table gives you. This is one of the most useful habits that you can develop, interacting at the last responsible moment. Notice I deliberately said responsible, not the last possible moment. That's not the same thing, always. The goal is to preserve your options for as long as you safely can, without allowing the threat to generate value that you can no longer undo. Rhystic Study is an easy example. Let's say it comes down, we all ignore it, and we're still ignoring it, and we're ignoring it. A few turns go by, they've drawn 7, 8, 9 cards. Now we're going to destroy it. Okay, good. They stopped at 9 before it got to 12, 15. But they already have 9 cards in hand. They can't undraw 9 cards in their hand. And we don't know what they've found. They may have found their win con, their combo pieces, their infinite pieces. They may have found something that'll destroy our board state. They may have found their Teferi's protection. Removing the setting now doesn't undo the advantage that's already been created. Same applies to treasures already created or creatures already reanimated. Sometimes answering the permanent eventually is successful, but strategically, you're late. So when you ask, can I afford to wait? Also ask, if this gets to happen once, twice, am I okay with what it creates? Because sometimes one trigger is enough. Another reason that you can't wait forever is the threat can get harder and harder and harder to answer as the turn and time goes on. Imagine somebody taps out to cast an engine that you know is going to be a problem. And right now they have no mana available. You know that their deck, maybe it's got some blue in it. Maybe you've played it before, you know it runs some counter spells, protection, or ways to sack the permanent for value. You know these things are in this deck and they're tapped out. You could say, it hasn't done anything yet, I can wait till next turn. That's part of our threat assessment that we just discussed. Except next turn they untap. Next turn they have access to mana. Maybe they're just really, really hoping that it doesn't get responded to right now because they would have a counter spell next turn that they could play, and they just rolled the dice on it. Therefore, urgency is not only when does this card become dangerous, but it's also how long am I going to have a clean opportunity to deal with it. Sometimes the last responsible moment is a lot earlier than you think. This is also where understanding the stack and priority matter. I'm not going to turn this into a full stack and priority video because I think that deserves its own video that we should probably do relatively soon as well. But for threat assessment, you need to know that sometimes destroying something after it resolves is perfectly fine. And sometimes it is not. It needs to be dealt with before it resolves. If the part that you care about is an ETB, a trigger, then destroying the creature afterwards isn't going to stop what you were trying to prevent. So you need to know when is the last point that my answer is still going to do what I need it to do. If I have a counter spell or I have a path in my hand, I need to use the counter spell if I'm worried about the ETB. If I use the path to exile, great, it's gone. Maybe it could do more harm in the future, but that's not getting rid of that trigger. You need to know when is the last point where my answer still does what I need it to do. Recognizing when the window is closing is part of good threat assessment. Once you identify something as dangerous, don't immediately turn that into kill it. Ask, how fast is this becoming a problem? What happens if it survives another turn? And can I safely wait and gather more info? Fine. Also ask, will I still have a clean opportunity to answer it later? The goal is to use it at some point where it actually matters. And once you know something really does need an answer, there's still another question. Do you actually need to be the person to deal with it? Your interaction is your resources, not a public service that you're helping the entire board state. We're all friends playing the game, but we're not all friends that are all going to win the game together. Let's say your opponent has a huge creature. It's dangerous, we're scared of it, but it's not coming to me. It's attacking the player across the field, and they're actually who I'm the most worried about in this game. Do I really want to remove that creature? Maybe. No, definitely not. I was gonna say maybe not, but no, definitely not, because right now, that creature's actually helping me. A threat to your opponent is not automatically a threat to you. Sometimes it's even an asset. I mean, imagine player A attacks player B for lethal. Player B has 4 cards in hand, untapped mana. I have removal, but before I save them, they get a chance to save themselves. They're the ones with the strongest incentive to spend a resource way before I should be incentivized to. If I immediately remove that attacker, I just spent one of my cards to preserve all of theirs and to prevent them from leaving the game. Maybe that's still correct. Maybe eliminating B would make A dominant, and we don't want that. But sometimes all we need to ask is to the table directly, do we have an answer for that? You don't have to tell everybody what's in your hand, but if your opponents are spending cards fighting each other, let them use their resources and hold on to yours for later. However, if somebody is actually about to win the game, combo off, something like that, use your resources. It's also really important to consider, what does your interaction actually accomplish, right? Before you remove something, ask yourself, what changes if I do this? Maybe you kill their commander, but if they have 10 mana and can just recast it again, maybe it's still worth it, and maybe commander tax matters or stops lethal turn, but if all you accomplished was making them pay 2 more mana while burning your only answer, was that exchange useful? Maybe. The same idea as if a player already has 40 tokens. Destroying that token doubler now answers the card, but it may not answer the problem anymore. Don't just ask, can I remove it? Ask, does this meaningfully improve the game state? We want to use the narrowest answer that we have for an issue as well. Say we have a Go for the Throat and we have a Chaos Warp in our hand. An opponent presents a creature that Go for the Throat can definitely answer, and you could use the Chaos Warp, it works, But if you use the Chaos Warp, that flexible response to something else is gone. And if somebody plays a dangerous enchantment or another permanent, then we're going to struggle to interact with that later, because Go for the Throat is not helping us deal with that issue now. So if the narrower card solves the problem, use the narrower card. Save the flexible interaction for the threat that actually requires it. Same principles with Swords to Plowshare versus Generous Gift. Good threat assessment is not only deciding whether to interact, it's deciding which resource you can afford to spend it on. Also, your life total is a resource. I know you've heard life is a resource. It is. Let's say you're at 38 life. Let's say somebody attacks you for 6. Do you really want to spend your only removal spell just to stay at 38 instead of going down to 32? Maybe there are combat triggers, maybe it's commander damage, maybe the damage sets something else up. But if it's just 6 damage, take the hit. It might be cheaper than spending the card. If you don't run much interaction, it's almost definitely cheaper in the long run than spending the card. Not every point of damage is worth a card in hand. In addition to that, not every creature is worth saving. Let's say an opponent attacks with an 8/8, it's a problem. We have a 5/5, we have a 3/3. We can double block. Maybe both of our creatures die, but so does that 8/8. It's easy to look at this and think, well, I'm losing 2 creatures for 1, and maybe my 5/5 and my 3/3, maybe they do little things that I like and I want my board to be able to do, and I've been struggling. But if that 8/8 is a genuine problem, my creatures are also removal. They're also interaction. Also, this especially applies if both of your creatures are replaceable. If there's an actual threat and the block lets you keep premium removal in your hand, this is probably an excellent trade. Sometimes the best removal spell is a block. And sometimes even a chump block is correct if it preserves your life, prevents commander damage, stops a combat trigger, or buys you the turn that you need. The goal isn't to preserve every permanent that you control. The goal is to use your resources in a way that gives you the best chance to win the game. So when you recognize a threat, don't just ask, can I deal with this? Ask, do I need to? Do I need to be the one who does it? And what am I giving up if I act? Because sometimes the most important question isn't which permanent is the threat. It's which player is actually positioned to take over the game, especially if I do make a move. Commander boards can be deceptive. One player may have 8 creatures on board, while the other player only has 3 permanents. Maybe that second player also has 7 cards in hand though, and 8 untapped mana, and a stocked graveyard. Which player should you be more worried about? The answer might not be the one with the bigger board. Visible board presence definitely matters, but it's only part of somebody's resources. Look at the cards in hand, the available mana, graveyard, any potential recursion, and any other resources like treasure or artifacts that tap for mana as well. A player with 10 creatures and 1 card left in hand might be closer to running out of gas than they look. If we can withstand that last card or 2, maybe we've stalled them out. Meanwhile, somebody with a smaller board state, a lot of cards in hand, a lot of mana available, they may be one turn away from just absolutely exploding and taking over. So don't just ask who has the most stuff, but ask who has the most meaningful resources. Threat assessment also isn't only about figuring out who is ahead right now. It's also about figuring out where the game is headed. A player may be slightly behind, but they've been drawing an extra card every turn, or here and there. They've been stockpiling treasure tokens. They have a pretty stacked graveyard and probably the means to bring stuff back. These are things we need to consider. They may not be the front runner yet, but they may be the player most likely to become the front runner. So ask, who's positioned to take over next? If this threat is dealt with, who's next in line? If you wait until somebody is obviously winning before treating them as a threat, then you may already be left in the dust. Also, something worth considering is easy damage is not always correct damage. Say one player has had a miserable start. They missed a land drop, they have no creatures, and they just haven't done much. They have no blockers, they're an easy person to hit. I can get some free hits in, I can get some free on-attack triggers. That does not automatically make them the correct target though. Another player is building up a real engine and starting to pull ahead. If you keep sending damage into the player who's already struggling just because they're open and struggling, you may be spending your pressure in the least useful place possible. Easy damage is not always correct damage. Being vulnerable and being threatening are 2 different things. That doesn't mean never attack the player who is behind and always feel sorry for them. But maybe their deck can win out of nowhere. Maybe eliminating them is strategically valuable. Maybe commander damage matters. The point is, attack with reason. Don't make somebody the automatic target just because they happen to be open. They're also somebody that could be helping you if they're able to pop off, deal with the very large threat at hand. Also, putting pressure on the very large threat at hand could cause them to have to chump block, use their interaction, block with their creatures, and have them destroyed, and now they're not as scary. Very important things to consider. It's also important to think about what is keeping the real threat in check. Sometimes a permanent can be bad for you, but it can be good for the game state. Imagine a player who currently is ahead has also built up a huge pile of treasure tokens. Let's say somebody else somehow manages to control a collector oof. They chaos warped into it. That can be annoying you as well. You have soul rings, maybe you have your own treasure tokens. Your mana rings are shut off. You have removal, you would really like your artifacts back. But killing that oof feels like it'd be good because it would allow your board to open back up. But is it really the right thing to do right now? I mean, until you can answer the threat, do you really want them to now have access to all of this mana because you got rid of the oof? Probably not. It'll improve your position a little, but it would improve their position a lot. So the question isn't only, is this permanent hurting me, but who is it benefiting the most if it disappears? It kind of ties back into that, thinking about what happens if we interact. Sometimes that annoying hate piece, blocker, taxing effect, threatening creature is the exact thing that is preventing somebody else other than you from running away with the game. It can be annoying to deal with. We can all pretend like we're all annoyed with it together, but the person that is the real threat is going to be egging that on and trying to work out a way to persuade you to get rid of it, because they know that they can take over then. Before you attack somebody, before you remove anything, and before you wipe the board, ask, what does the table look like after I do this? Maybe removing that permanent opens the door for the strongest player. Maybe attacking the struggling player gives the actual threat another free turn. Maybe wiping the board hurts everybody, while the player with the graveyard recursion deck, it's fine with it because they're able to rebuild and rebuild easily. Or maybe your play absolutely improves the table and you should make it. These are all options and things you need to consider. The point is that threat assessment doesn't end when you identify the dangerous thing. You also need to understand the consequences of removing the dangerous thing. Good threat assessment isn't just understanding the game state in front of you, but it's also understanding the game state that your decisions are about to make for you and everyone else. We've talked about a lot, so I want to leave you with something simple enough to actually use while you're sitting at the table. Before you attack something, remove something, or spend one of your important answers, run through these 5 questions. 1. What is the real threat? Don't just look for the biggest creature or the most famous card. Look at what each deck is trying to do and which piece is actually making that plan work. 2. How urgent is it? What happens if it survives another turn, another trigger, gets another activation? Can you safely wait, or is your window to interact closing? A threat can be real without being urgent. 3. Do I actually need to act? What does spending your resource accomplish? Can you take the damage instead? Can you block? Can you trade creatures? Could a narrower answer solve the problem while preserving your more flexible interaction? 4. Do I need to be the one who acts? Sometimes there's something on the battlefield that is clearly becoming a problem for everybody. Maybe it's a powerful value engine, maybe it's a commander starting to take over, or permanent the whole table agrees probably shouldn't stay around much longer. Even then, why does that answer automatically have to come from you? There's 3 other players at the table, and they all have resources too. Give them a chance to contribute, especially if you're last in turn order. And if nobody can or nobody will, and the threat reaches the point where it actually has to be answered, then use your interaction. Somebody needs to answer it, and I need to answer it, are not always the same statement. 5. What happens after I do answer it? Who benefits from the play? Did you weaken the actual threat? Or did you accidentally remove the thing keeping the threat at bay? Your decision creates the next game state. Think about that game state before you create it. Let's put it all together. If you want the short version, ask yourself, what is it? How fast is it? Who should answer it? What happens afterward? You're not going to get every threat assessment decision right. Sometimes you'll fire off removal too early. That's part of learning Commander. The goal is to stop making those decisions automatically. Don't go with that gut decision anymore. Don't remove something just because it's big. Don't attack somebody just because they're open. Don't target a player just because they won last game. Don't spend an answer just because you happen to have one. Slow the decision down just enough to ask what actually matters. Because running more interaction will absolutely make your commander decks better. But knowing where to point it, when to use it, and when to keep it in your hand is what makes you better at playing them. If you've got a threat assessment decision that still haunts you, or a card your playgroup always seems to target no matter what else is happening, I'd love to hear it in the comments. And there's one part of this conversation that we touched on only briefly today: the stack and priority. Knowing exactly when you can respond, and when removing a permanent actually does or doesn't stop what it's doing, can completely change how you use your interaction. This deserves its own video, but for now, the next time something scary hits the table, don't immediately reach for the removal. Ask yourself, is this actually the threat? And if it is, does it really need to be me that deals with it?